Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're going to take you behind the scenes of an organization that, most people only think about when something goes wrong, really the Secret Service. You've given us some amazing sources to dig into, including an interview with Carol Leonig, the Washington Post reporter who wrote Zero Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service. So,
Yeah, it's really fascinating to think about their impact on history and just the sheer volume of challenges they face in protecting, U.S. presidents.
absolutely. And, we're going to uncover some pretty surprising facts, I think, along the way. For example, did you know that the Secret Service was actually founded on the same day Lincoln was assassinated?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But the irony is, right, they weren't created to protect the president
Yeah.
at all.
No.
Their original mission was to combat counterfeit currency. It was a major problem back then.
So, wait, on that fateful day, while Lincoln is facing this tragic end, the agency that would become like synonymous with presidential protection was more concerned with fake money. That's great. What made them shift to protecting the president?
Well, it was a gradual process driven by, unfortunately, more tragedies. After President McKinley was assassinated in 1901, the idea of a dedicated presidential protection force, it finally gained some traction. But even then, there was resistance. Some people thought that quote unquote, palace guard contradicted the image of an accessible American president. So,
That makes sense. Times were different then. It seems like each assassination attempt forced the Secret Service to evolve and adapt. You know what I mean? And Leoning really brings this to life when she talks about the Kennedy assassination and Director Rowley's testimony to the Warren Commission.
yeah, Rowley fiercely defended his agents, and he placed the blame on a lack of resources and funding. He argued the agency was, overstretched, ill-equipped to handle the demands of protecting a president like Kennedy.
And it's interesting because, his testimony reveals this kind of tension that I feel like still exists within the agency today, right? That constant struggle for adequate resources and recognition. But this wasn't the only controversy surrounding the Kennedy assassination. Leonig mentions that some agents had been drinking the night before, which obviously raised some questions.
It's a detail that kind of adds a human element to this historical tragedy. While Rowley insisted that their actions weren't a factor, it sparked debate about preparedness and the pressures these agents face.
For sure. The Kennedy assassination was undoubtedly a turning point, and Leoning highlights how Rowley used this tragedy to push for much-needed reforms. He doubled the size of the presidential detail and even introduced computers to analyze threats, which, back then that was cutting edge.
He was a visionary, in that sense, recognizing that the Secret Service needed to evolve with the times, but as we know, their challenges definitely didn't end there.
No, not at all. Just a couple of decades later, they faced another major test with the attempted assassination of President Reagan. And this event, I think, truly showcases the split-second decisions and intense training these agents undergo. Can you kind of paint us a picture of what happened?
Okay, so imagine the chaos. You have John Hinckley Jr. firing 6 shots outside the Washington Hilton. The scene is just pandemonium. Reagan's wounded. Everyone is scrambling to react. Yet amidst all this chaos, you see the Secret Service's rigorous training just kick in.
Yeah, Leonig really emphasizes that. She describes Agent Jerry Parr, the head of Reagan's detail, instantly pushing the president into the low and their attack on the principal training, which focuses on, immediately protecting and evacuating the president. It likely saved Reagan's life.
It's a prime example of how years of preparation can really mean the difference between life and death in those critical moments. But the story doesn't end there. Agent Parr made another crucial decision. Instead of heading to the White House, he diverted the motorcade to George Washington Hospital.
Why make that call in such a high-pressure situation?
Well, Parr noticed Reagan coughing up blood, and he suspected an internal injury, and he knew immediate medical attention was critical. It was a decision, later lauded by doctors who said going to the White House first could have been fatal.
Wow. What an incredible display of quick thinking and medical knowledge under that kind of pressure. So we've seen how the Secret Service evolved from fighting counterfeiters to protecting presidents, but I imagine the challenges don't stop there. What does Leonig say about the constant threat assessment they have to do?
Well, it's a mind-boggling task, honestly. They're bombarded with threats every single day, and they have to determine which are credible, which require further investigation, which can be dismissed. It's a massive behind-the-scenes intelligence operation.
So it's not just about physical protection. They're analyzing motives, means, conducting countless interviews, right? What a complex and demanding process.
Yeah, and the threats are constantly evolving, which Leonic illustrates with the dramatic increase in threats against President Obama, sadly. Much of this was due to, racial prejudice, highlighting this whole new layer of challenges for the Secret Service.
Yeah, that's sobering. It reminds us that protecting a president isn't just about like physical security, but it's about navigating complex societal issues and prejudices as well.
Exactly. The job requires constant adaptation and awareness of like an ever-changing threat landscape.
Okay, so we've talked about historical turning points, threat assessment, but what about like the day-to-day reality of being a Secret Service agent? Leonig paints a picture of a job that's not all glamour and action. What does she say about like the psychological toll?
Well, it's a life of like constant pressure and vigilance. Imagine the weight of knowing that any lapse in focus could have, devastating consequences.
Yeah. And she shares this really powerful anecdote about the agent in charge of security during Kennedy's visit to Dallas. He described his head constantly swiveling, searching for threats. It really gives you a sense of the mental strain.
It emphasizes that the job demands, not just physical strength and tactical skills, but mental endurance and the ability to manage constant pressure.
It makes you realize these agents are putting their mental health on the line every single day.
Absolutely. It's a job that requires tremendous sacrifice,
Yeah.
both personally and psychologically. And unfortunately, as Leoneg reveals, the Secret Service has also been plagued by scandals and internal struggles that add, another layer of complexity to their story.
That's right. We can't ignore those darker aspects. She mentions the Cartagena incident where agents were involved with prostitutes before Obama's arrival and a lawsuit brought by black agents alleging racial discrimination.
These incidents expose like a troubling side to the agency, raising questions about its culture and accountability.
It's disheartening to hear about these issues within an organization with such a critical mission.
It certainly highlights the need for significant reform and, a deeper look into the cultural problems that have plagued the Secret Service.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've seen the Secret Service's evolution from its unexpected origins to facing major historical events, grappling with internal struggles. But this is just the beginning. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve deeper into the psychological toll of the job and the impact of recent events on the agency's ability to protect the president.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of the Secret Service. We've been exploring their history, their evolution, and some of the intense pressures they face, right? It's a
Yeah.
job that demands like not only physical strength, but also incredible mental resilience.
Yeah, and as we touched on before the break, that mental resilience is tested not only by those external threats, but also by the internal struggles within the agency itself. Right. We were just discussing some of the scandals and cultural problems that have plagued the Secret Service, like the Cartagena incident and the lawsuit by black agents alleging racial discrimination. These issues really raise concerns about the agency's culture and accountability, right? And those concerns, I think, become even more magnified when we look at more recent events like the security breaches during the Obama and Trump administrations.
Absolutely. Those incidents, they reveal vulnerabilities that go beyond like individual agents and point to, systemic issues. For example, Leonig details this shocking event in 2014 where a fence jumper actually made it inside the White House while President Obama was away.
Wait, really? That's hard to believe. The White House is supposed to be like the most secure location in the country. What went wrong?
Well, the investigation revealed this like cascade of failures, malfunctioning alarms, communication breakdowns, delayed responses. It exposed this gap between the perception of the Secret Service as like this elite, infallible force and the reality of their vulnerabilities.
So even with all the training and technology, they're not immune to human error and system flaws.
Right.
And it didn't stop there. Leon Air also talks about a breach during the Trump administration in 2017 where someone got onto the White House grounds and wasn't detected for a significant amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah, these incidents, sparked this wave of criticism and raised serious doubts about the Secret Service's ability to like adapt to these evolving threats.
Yeah. It seems like a pattern of reactive responses rather than like proactive prevention. What does Leonig say about how the agency handled these breaches?
Well, she's pretty critical, actually. Leonig argues that there was a tendency to downplay the severity, and to prioritize protecting the agency's reputation instead of like actually addressing the root causes. And this lack of transparency and accountability is, concerning.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there's like a fear of admitting mistakes or a culture of sweeping problems under the rug.
And without acknowledging those mistakes, right, it's difficult to learn and improve. Leonig stresses that, real change has been slow despite numerous reports and recommendations for reform. It seems like a cultural shift is needed, one that prioritizes learning from mistakes and, making necessary changes, even if it means admitting fault.
That makes sense. A culture of transparency and accountability could go a long way in rebuilding public trust and ensuring the safety of future presidents. But, like, who is ultimately responsible for driving this change?
Well, Leonig makes this compelling argument that it really falls on the president to, demand improvements, and provide the resources for the Secret Service to actually effectively carry out its mission.
Hmm. You'd think the presidents would be, like, highly motivated to ensure the Secret Service is operating at peak performance. I mean, after all, their lives are on the line. But Leonig suggests there's been this hesitation to publicly criticize the agency, possibly out of fear of appearing weak or, like, undermining their own security.
It's a delicate balance, right? They need to, project confidence in the agency while also holding them accountable for their actions. But without that accountability, there's this risk of complacency and a failure to address, those deep-seated issues.
Leonig's insights are especially relevant, I think, in today's world, where the threat landscape is becoming, increasingly complex and volatile. We're seeing, like, a rise in domestic extremism, political polarization, the spread of misinformation online.
Exactly. These factors create, a whole new set of challenges for the Secret Service. They're not just dealing with physical threats anymore, but also, the unpredictable nature of, online radicalization and the potential for lone wolf attacks.
And if that wasn't enough, the agency is also struggling with those internal issues like burnout, low morale, a shortage of qualified agents. It's like a perfect storm of challenges.
It really paints a picture of, an organization at a crossroads.
Yeah.
The Secret Service needs to adapt, modernize, address these internal problems if they want to effectively protect future presidents.
So, like, what does the future hold for them? Can they rise to the occasion and meet these challenges, or will they continue to be haunted by the same issues that have plagued them in the past?
Leonig leaves us with that very question, and it's something, we should all be pondering. The safety of the president and, in many ways, the stability of our democracy rests on the Secret Service's ability to, evolve and fulfill its mission.
It's a crucial point. And as we move into the final part of our deep dives, we'll explore, like, potential solutions and what steps can be taken to ensure the Secret Service is equipped to handle, the threats of the 21st century. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent this episode really unpacking the history, the challenges, and the internal struggles of the Secret Service. It's been a fascinating look, behind the curtain of an organization we usually only see, in snippets on the news.
Yeah, we've gone from their surprising origin story, fighting counterfeiters, to the high-stakes world of protecting presidents. And we can't forget those scandals and cultural issues that have raised those tough questions about, their effectiveness and ability to protect the president.
Right. It's a lot to consider. But Leonig doesn't just, point out the problems. She offers some potential solutions. And spoiler alert, it's not as simple as just throwing more money at the Secret Service.
Right. One of her key arguments is that it'll take a president who's willing to, to step up and demand real reform. Someone who's not afraid to, challenge the status quo and push for those changes, even if it ruffles some feathers.
Yeah, it's interesting. You'd think presidents would be the most motivated to ensure that the Secret Service is, top notch. I mean, their lives depend on it.
Yeah, but Leonig suggests that presidents have often been reluctant to, to publicly criticize the agency. Maybe they fear it could damage their own security or make them look weak.
It's a tough spot to be in. But she argues that without that presidential push for accountability, the Secret Service is likely to, keep making the same mistakes and keep struggling with those cultural problems we've discussed.
Yeah, and it's not just about accountability. Leonig also highlights the need for more resources, especially when it comes to, recruiting and retaining skilled agents.
Right, that makes sense. The Secret Service has been dealing with staffing issues for years with, agents leaving for better pay, less stress in the private sector. Who can blame them, honestly?
And that shortage of experienced agents it puts even more pressure on those who remain, leading to, burnout, low morale, and potentially, an increased risk of those very security lapses we've been talking about. It's like a vicious cycle.
So it seems like a multi-pronged approach is needed.
Yeah.
Addressing internal issues within the agency and applying external pressure from the White House. It's a big challenge.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember, the scope of their responsibility. The Secret Service isn't just protecting the president, right? They also protect the vice president, their families, former presidents, and even, visiting heads of state. Their reach is enormous.
It's a huge responsibility, especially in today's world where, like, threats are coming from all directions, right? Domestic extremism, cyber attacks, lone wolf actors. It's a whole new ballgame. Do you think the Secret Service is, like, really equipped to handle the threats of the 21st century?
That's the million-dollar question.
No.
Based on Leoning's reporting, it seems like the answer is, well, not entirely. They've made progress, but there's a long way to go. So what can be done?
Yeah.
Leoning suggests a few key steps.
Okay, let's hear them. What needs to happen?
Well, first, the president needs to make it, like, crystal clear that the Secret Service is a top priority. And not just with words, right, but with actions. That means providing adequate funding, pushing for those necessary reforms, and holding the agency accountable for its performance.
But it can't just be the president, right? Others need to step up as well.
You're absolutely right. Congress also needs to get involved. They need to, provide the resources and oversight to make sure the Secret Service can actually do its job effectively.
And what about within the agency itself? What kind of changes need to happen there?
Well, they need a cultural shift, a real one. A culture that values, like, transparency, accountability, and continuous improvement. That means addressing those issues of misconduct, discrimination, and burnout that have been, like, holding them back.
So it's a tall order, but it's clear that the stakes are incredibly high. The safety of the president and, by extension, the stability of our democracy depends on a strong and effective Secret Service.
And while we've uncovered some uncomfortable truths about the agency's past and their internal struggles, I think it's important to remember that the vast majority of Secret Service agents are dedicated professionals who put their lives on the line every day.
That's a great point. It's easy to focus on the negatives, but these agents are out there doing a difficult and often, like, thankless job. Their work, it often goes unnoticed until something goes wrong.
Exactly. So as we conclude this deep dive, here's something to ponder. Given all the, increasing complexities and volume of threats we see in the 21st century, what does the future hold for the Secret Service?
Will they be able to adapt and keep protecting U.S. presidents effectively? Or will they be overwhelmed by these challenges? Those are questions with no easy answers, but they're worth thinking about.
And if you want to learn more about this fascinating organization and its complex history, I highly recommend checking out Carol Leonig's book, Aziraphale Veil: The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service. It's an eye-opening read for sure.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of a topic you're passionate about.